So you're in the market for a new laptop and you want to use it for gaming, streaming, and maybe even a little bit of video editing, or maybe just for work or school. Ultimately, it all comes down to your workflow and priorities. The good news is that there are so many options out there at different price points that'll fit your budget. The bad news is that because there are so many options, it can be a bit challenging to pick the right laptop. You see, a lot of laptop manufacturers are pushing out or heavily marketing some features that, in my opinion, are too hyped. So that's where this video comes in, because I'm going to walk you through 5 features that you should avoid, or at least marketing terms that you shouldn't fall for or pay for more. So count this as more of a warning guide than anything else, so you don't get sucked into traps that might look good, you end up paying a premium for without a specific reason. So I do want to mention something very important. I'm not going to pick or tell you to avoid a specific product with a specific CPU or GPU, because both AMD and Intel have competitive processors, and NVIDIA and AMD have given us amazing options on the graphics end. But anyways, that brings me to my first 2 points, which is to do with understanding the display that you're getting. You see, I think this is the most important feature of a laptop, and a lot of times companies sell you extra bling that's really just a gimmick. For instance, 360 Hz refresh rate that everyone's talking about these days. To be honest with you, higher refresh rates are generally beneficial, but this marketing term for 360 Hz on laptops is just pretty pointless, at least right now with the current hardware. I mean, if you look on the desktop side, even with a combination of a high-end GPU and a high-end CPU, they actually struggle to hit a constant 360 frames per second, even in competitive titles like CSGO, Valorant, and Rainbow Six. On the laptop side, the reality is that 99% of them actually can't push 360 frames per second constantly, regardless of how long you push these settings. You also need to be aware of the quality of these 360 Hz screens right now. I mean, sure, they give you the high refresh rate, but they're not able to deliver accurate color tones or color gamut as ones with lower refresh rates, and they're only available in 1080p. Meanwhile, if you look at 120 Hz, 165 Hz, or even 240 Hz panels, generally, but most of the time, they deliver better color gamut, and of course you can get those refresh rates at higher resolutions. And because of that ultra high refresh rate, they're usually a lot less bright too, and that's something important if you're using a laptop in extremely brighter environments. But at the same time, I have to mention that laptop displays in general are all over the place, since there are plenty of crappy screens with low refresh rates too. So just make sure you do your research first. Then my second point, and this one actually has my head scratching a bit, it's just doesn't make any sense. And that's this marketing push towards 4K resolution displays on 15-inch and smaller laptops. Now, to be honest, I just don't get it. I think it's pointless unless if you have a niche situation, because out of the box, these laptops come scaled to 200%, which gives you supersized icons and very little room to organize your content. And if you end up scaling it down to 100%, you'll actually need a microscope to navigate around with. It's also another factor that'll take a hit on battery life. So if you're shopping around for thin and light devices, I would highly recommend 1080p or even 1200p resolution that you can find on 16:10 displays if you're shopping for 14-inch or smaller categories, while 1440p or 1600p only becomes useful above 14 inches. Next up, I avoid mechanical keyboards. Now, just to be clear, a standalone mechanical keyboard for a desktop PC is awesome. I actually use one on my desk and I absolutely love it. But my problem here is the current state of so-called mechanical keyboards on laptops, because their intent is usual. They want to bring that mechanical keyboard experience to laptops, and the execution, it's usually terrible. I, for one, don't think it's a necessity since it adds cost to the product, and the experience is just not quite there yet compared to a standard mechanical keyboard, because most of them have a clickety-clack sound, which can be super annoying, especially if you're typing within a classroom setting or working in a shared space with coworkers. And the other thing to keep note of is that these keys require a lot more force to actuate. So all in all, it just doesn't add any benefits to your gaming experience compared to a standard setup. Now for number 4, well, it's actually one of those marketing things that makes absolutely no sense to me. And I want to discuss audio, or the speaker setup on laptops. Once again, this is an area that so many manufacturers pimp about, like experience the most authentic sound signature, or the sweetest sound on earth, or immerse yourself in 3D audio. I kid you not, these are some of the quotes that I've pulled directly from some laptops' official webpage, because they'll claim that these speakers are tuned by Bang & Olufsen, Dynaudio, and Dolby Atmos, which sounds great, but does it add anything to the experience? Most of the time, not really. And that's because at the end of the day, most of them use the same crappy speakers that are located at the bottom of the chassis, so sound essentially bounces off the surface, resulting in lower fidelity and minimal bass response. Now, there are a few laptops featuring front-facing drivers that sound excellent, and it really goes to show how much effort they've put into designing it, which I admire. But if you're really looking to upgrade your audio experience from your existing laptop, unfortunately, you still have to rely on an external setup. All right, I also wanted to add something that's not really a feature, but it's actually something that keeps on annoying the heck out of me. And that's exhaust vents pointed directly at your mouse hand. Now, if you're someone who's comfortable using laptop trackpads for any productive tasks, this might not affect you the most. But for gamers, this is huge, because obviously you don't buy a gaming laptop to game on a trackpad, because if you do, I really want to know how you do it. But either way, you'll naturally gravitate towards a dedicated mouse. So if you get a laptop with exhaust vents pointing directly on your left or right hand side, depending on your preference, you'll eventually experience hot air blasting at your mouse hand. So look for designs where the heat dissipation is directed towards the back, where there's less contact. Now, I've come across a few designs or a few laptop designs that have that sort of setup, but some of them have I/O located over there. And if you have a USB drive or an external hard drive plugged in, well, you're essentially gonna bake those things. So watch out for those. This last point I want to discuss is probably the most important out of all these other tips, and it's not to assume a high-end GPU is actually a high-end GPU. Let me explain. Earlier this year, when NVIDIA announced the RTX 30 series GPUs for laptops, they gave us an estimated board power range for the RTX 3080, the 3070, and 3060. AMD is doing the same thing with their newer RX 6000M series as well. Ultimately, it's up to laptop manufacturers to set the power limit based on things like cooler design, power delivery, and chassis temperatures they're willing to put up with. Now, that might not sound like a huge deal, but a lower wattage high-end card can technically be beaten by a less expensive one that's sucking back more power. For example, let's look at laptop A, which sports an RTX 3080, and laptop B sporting a 3070, but otherwise they have the exact same specs. Now, on paper, you would assume the 3080 would be the faster GPU because that's NVIDIA's flagship offering for the laptop market, and it costs a ton of money. But if you take a closer look at their power levels, a 3080 featuring 80 watts will perform much slower compared to a 3070 featuring 140 watts, because the higher power levels enables the chip to run at high frequencies, resulting in better performance. Meanwhile, based on the name of the GPU, buyers of course assume that they're getting better performance, but in reality, they aren't. There's also some good news as well, because a lot of manufacturers have started listing the power levels of their GPUs, so make sure you check the spec sheet and take that into account before assuming one is faster than the other one. So that pretty much wraps up my top 5 features that you should avoid when you're shopping around for a new laptop. But other than that, thanks so much for watching. I'm Ibra with Hardware Connects. Stay safe and also spend responsibly.